The billionaire father returned from his business trip and froze, paralyzed by the shocking scene unfolding before him. His small daughter, swallowed by a ragged and filthy pink dress, was clutching her infant brother, who was only a few months old. Her voice shattered into desperate sobs as she pleaded, "Please don't hurt us anymore, not me or my brother." From that precise instant, every dark secret suffocating the silence of the sprawling mansion began to hemorrhage into the light. James Harrison sat in his sterile top-floor office. At his age, he was the owner and CEO of the crowning floor of Chicago's Willis Tower, a steel and glass monument in the city's heart. On his vast mahogany desk sat a gold-plated fountain pen and a formidable stack of acquisition files. He signed each page mechanically, the light from the panoramic window glinting off the Rolex on his wrist. His bespoke suit fit his broad shoulders flawlessly. His Italian leather shoes gleamed beneath the desk. Everything surrounding him screamed wealth, success, and absolute power. They were the very things any man could dream of, yet inside, his heart was a hollowed-out void. What city are you watching this video from, and what time is it? By the way, if you're enjoying my videos, I'd be so happy if you could subscribe to my channel and like this video. James had once known real family happiness. Sophia, his first wife, had been the light of his life. Emily, his first daughter, used to run through the garden, her soft brown hair waving in the wind. And now there was Matthew, the baby, just 8 months old, born in the shadow of loss. The day Sophia left this world due to a postpartum hemorrhage, James felt as if his own life had evaporated. 8 months had passed, and not once had he truly sat down to play with Emily, nor had he held Matthew in his arms. He took refuge in business trips, paperwork, and quarterly reports, as if he could outrun his own memories. During that time, Veronica, his second wife, appeared like an angel. She had been a close friend of Sophia's. She had entered the house with a gentle presence, soothing everything that was broken with her sweet, radiant smile. To James, she was the devoted woman he needed. If Sophia had been the light, Veronica was his salvation. She held both children as if they were her own, caring for them with the tenderness of a model mother. Seeing that, James felt at ease. At least the children have a woman in the house, he thought. It's better than growing up with just a cold father. He was always grateful to her for carrying the weight he had abandoned. Today, after a month-long business trip, James signed the last file, stood up, and saw his reflection in the large mirror on the wall. His severe face, his tired eyes. Suddenly, a thought crossed his mind. He wanted to go home early without warning anyone. He wanted to bring them a small surprise. Maybe Emily would run into his arms. Maybe Matthew would smile when he held him. These thoughts softened him for the first time in months. James grabbed his coat and left quickly, before his secretary could ask another question. The luxury car glided down the highway toward his mansion in Lake Forest, the affluent suburb outside the city. That house, once filled with laughter and warm with life, was now a place James barely visited, stopping only between trips. Today felt different. He wanted to see his family. The iron gates opened, and James stepped into the grand foyer. Everything was unusually still. The golden glow of the chandelier fell on the marble floor. He left his briefcase on the table and took off his coat. Then, from somewhere deeper in the house, he heard the faint sound of a child's sobs. Matthew. The sound pierced the silence. James froze. Amidst the weak cries, another voice followed, trembling, small, and broken. "Please don't hurt us anymore. Not me or my brother." James's body tensed. It was Emily, his daughter's voice, choked and pleading. His entire body constricted. His heart seemed to stop. He moved slowly down the hallway and stopped just out of sight, behind the door frame leading to the living room. The scene he witnessed made it hard to breathe. Emily, 6 years old, her brown hair tangled and her pink dress stained with dirt, was huddled on the floor, her small arms wrapped tightly around Matthew. The baby's face was red, his cries incessant, his tiny hands reaching out and clutching his sister. Emily bowed her head, her shoulders trembling. In front of them stood Veronica. She wore a tight red dress, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her face heavily made up. But her voice was nothing like the sweetness she showed James. It was sharp. Every word cut like glass. Shut up! How many times have I told you? Do not bother me. If you don't obey, I'll throw you both out onto the street again. James lunged forward, placing himself between Veronica and the children. Enough. His voice was hoarse but firm. He reached out, trying to take Matthew, his movements clumsy after so long without holding his son. Let me hold him, Emily. Come here to Dad. The girl froze, her fingers clinging to the edge of her dress. James hesitated for an instant, his hand hovering in the air before he withdrew it, instinctively standing in front of them to protect them. A flash of venom crossed Veronica's eyes, sharp as a needle. In an instant, it vanished behind a gentle smile. You're back? I was just teaching the children some discipline. They were being too rowdy. She stepped closer, placing a light hand on the sleeve of James's jacket, her voice softening. Darling, you must be tired after coming home. Don't get upset over a moment of childish whining. The doctor said, children need discipline, didn't he? I've been with them all month. I understand their behavior best. James held Matthew tightly, feeling a burn in his throat. He looked at Emily, saw the panic in her eyes, and then back at Veronica's tender smile. She tilted her head, pursing her lips as if in pity. Or maybe you just feel guilty for being away too long, so everything seems worse than it is. Don't overwhelm yourself. Children pick up on the adults around them. The words slid out, smooth as a breeze but sharp as a razor. James looked down, swallowing hard. He spoke slowly, fighting to stay calm. I don't want to hear crying like that in this house. Veronica seized the words, turning them into her excuse. Exactly. That's why I'll handle it in the gentlest way. Go take a shower. Get changed, get comfortable. Don't let the children see us disagreeing. It's not good for their minds. As she finished, she shot a sideways glance at Emily. A single slight smile was enough to make the girl bow her head, a snake hidden under velvet. And James saw it, though he couldn't identify it in time. He stood paralyzed, half anger, half guilt, tangled in a knot inside him. A painful, haunting question echoed in his mind. What did I just witness? James took a deep breath, shifted the baby in his arms so he wouldn't slip, and walked into the living room as if everything were normal. Veronica had already adopted a gentle expression, her voice warm but clearly forced. You came home early, you surprised me. I'll tell the kitchen to prepare dinner. Sit down and rest. I'll take care of the rest. James nodded. He looked at Matthew, who was still sobbing, and his chest tightened with the feeling of having missed something deeply important for the last 8 months. Veronica snapped her fingers lightly, and the housekeeper appeared in the kitchen doorway. It was Mrs. Davis, an older woman who had worked for the family since the days Sophia was alive. She was discreet, well-mannered, and spoke little. She gave a soft nod to James and then returned inside to set the table. Dinner was served quickly. The yellow light reflected off the silverware. The aroma of chicken noodle soup rose warmly, but couldn't dispel the chill inside James. He sat at the head of the table with Veronica to his right, Emily across from him, and Matthew in a high chair. His eyes still wet and restless. Eat. Honey, so you grow up strong, Veronica said, placing a piece of meat on Emily's plate. Her voice was sweet as honey. Her smile was fixed in place, but the hand she rested on the girl's shoulder pressed down just a little too firmly. James saw Emily's small shoulders flinch and the spoon in her hand tremble. He leaned forward slightly, watching more closely. On Emily's left wrist were faint purple marks that looked like fading bruises. James's heart hammered. He heard his own voice rise, slow and heavy. Emily, has anyone at school been bothering you? The girl startled. Her eyes flashed with fear before quickly looking down. Her voice was barely a whisper. No, Father. Veronica let out a soft laugh, turning to James. Children bump themselves when they play. I'm always reminding her to be careful. James remained silent, turning the spoon in his hand. A wave of guilt washed over his back, knowing that for months he hadn't been there to notice these small things. Suddenly, Matthew kicked. His lips curved down and a whimper turned into a long wail. Veronica stood up, walking over to pick him up. Her hands slid under his arms, but they gripped him too tightly. The movement was fast but without tenderness, and Matthew screamed louder, his face turning red. Give him to me. James stood up quickly, holding out his arms, his voice urgent. Veronica looked at him briefly, then handed the baby over. James caught him awkwardly, his arms stiff as wood after so long without holding his son. Emily raised her head, her eyes filled with surprise and hope. James adjusted his grip, pulling the baby closer, rocking him gently. Matthew continued to cry, but his sobs became less sharp, and James's own breathing slowed with each firm pat on the baby's back. "You're safe now, Dad's here," James whispered. The words left his mouth, and he suddenly realized how long it had been since he'd last said anything like them. The dinner dragged on slowly. Veronica kept starting conversations to fill the silence, mentioning a new investment portfolio, asking James about his business trip, sometimes turning to Emily with a half-hearted question, as if to prove she cared. Mrs. Davis remained silent in a corner of the room, her hands clasped. She didn't interrupt once, but when James met her gaze, he saw an uneasiness in her eyes that she couldn't hide. He was about to call her over, but Veronica had already offered dessert, leaving his question trapped in his chest. When the meal ended, James placed his napkin on the table and spoke calmly. "I'm going upstairs to change and review some documents. Emily, make sure you brush your teeth after you finish eating." "Yes, Dad." Emily's reply was weak. Her eyes flickered rapidly before dulling again. James pushed his chair back, lifted Matthew, and handed the baby to Veronica. This time he noticed her hand more closely, her thumb pressing into the child's side with a practiced reflex. James pressed his lips together and said nothing. He turned and walked toward the stairs, the wooden steps creaking softly under his feet. On the fourth step, he stopped cold. He had heard the faint clinking of glasses, the scraping of a chair, and then Veronica's voice, dropping low, sharp as a blade cutting silk. "Listen to me carefully. Remember what I say. If you dare to open your mouth to your father, I will throw you and your brother out onto the street. I swear it." There was a pause, followed by the sound of rapid, shallow breathing, surely Emily's, and then a choked whisper. "Please, please, don't. I'll be quiet." "I won't say a word." James stood paralyzed, his hand gripping the banister until his knuckles turned white. His heart hammered against his ribs as if trying to break free. His mind replayed the images he had just seen. Veronica's shifting voice, sweet one moment, venomous the next. His daughter's terrified eyes, the bruises on her thin wrists, Matthew's cries in arms that were not his own. Downstairs, Veronica's tone changed again. She let out a thin laugh and spoke louder, just enough for her words to drift up the stairwell. "Good. Finish your food, and then I'll get you dessert." James still didn't move. Sweat dampened his palms, though his body felt cold. He swallowed, but his throat remained dry as anger and guilt enveloped him, squeezing until he could barely breathe. Mrs. Davis slipped out of the kitchen. Her shoes made almost no sound. She stopped. Her eyes rose briefly toward the staircase, as if she knew someone was there, but she didn't dare look directly. She placed a folded towel on the bottom railing, a small, discreet gesture that felt like a message. James bit the inside of his cheek hard to steady himself. He knew he couldn't just walk away as if nothing had happened. Yet, he also understood that a single outburst now might frighten those small, trembling hands even more. He tightened his grip on the banister, took a deep breath, and forced the breaking wave inside him to calm down. And so he remained there on that step, listening to the beat of his own heart, the faint rattle of a spoon against a bowl, and the rise of a new, unmistakable command within him, a vow he couldn't postpone another day. James's hand was still clinging to the banister. He inhaled deeply, let go, then returned to the dining table and spoke a brief sentence to end the dinner. After that, he went to his study, closed the door, and stood silently by the bookshelf for a long time. He didn't sleep that night, just listened to the small footsteps of his children and the whispers that echoed down the hall like needles piercing the skin. When the sky turned pale, he washed his face with cold water, adjusted his collar, and walked straight to the kitchen. Mrs. Davis was placing dishes on the wooden shelf. She was the elderly housekeeper who had lived in this house since Sophia was a young wife. She was quiet, meticulous, and always maintained the proper boundaries. Hearing James's footsteps, she froze, her thin, dry hand still holding the dishcloth. "How were the children while I was away?" James asked. His voice was firm, but his eyes couldn't hide the exhaustion. She hesitated, looked down, and then sighed. "Do you want the truth?" James nodded. "I only want the truth." She put down the cloth, speaking slowly so as not to stumble over her emotions. Some nights, Miss Veronica made the girl stay on the porch for a long time, just for dropping a spoon. One night, I found her holding her little brother, sleeping in the storage room because their room was locked. Many times, Matthew was only given very diluted milk. He would cry from hunger until he fell asleep. I tried to intervene, but she told me I had no right to interfere in her way of raising them. James felt his heart constrict. The image of Sophia holding a bowl of oatmeal, lifting Emily into her chair, smiling as she told her a bedtime story. It returned like a blade cutting through memory. He swallowed, keeping his voice even. "Did you hear her make any threats?" "Yes." Her reply was soft, her eyes still fixed on the cloth. "She said that if the girl ever told you, both children would be thrown out onto the street. She also threatened to fire me if I ever spoke of it. I'm truly sorry, sir, she is too cunning." James shook his head, placing a hand on the back of a chair to stop it from trembling. "It's not your fault. From now on, if anything happens, you will tell me directly. And if necessary, would you be willing to testify?" She lifted her eyes, and in them was a quiet resolve. "For the children, I am willing." That entire day, James moved through the rooms as if inspecting an unfinished project. He called his office, postponed all meetings, excusing himself with family matters. He went into the children's room, opened the closet to check the blankets, examined the baby bottles, and took notes in a tight script. Every small trace felt like an accusation. Veronica smiled at him gently, asking about his work, but James said little. He told her they would talk later and asked the kitchen to prepare a light dinner. He didn't want to make noise. He wanted to see clearly. The evening fell very slowly. In the study, James pushed the files aside until only the small portrait of Sophia was left in front of him. He placed his hand on the wooden surface. An apology got stuck in his throat. The desk lamp illuminated the lines at the corners of his eyes. Outside in the hall, the wind whistled faintly through the crack in the door. Then came the sound of hesitant footsteps, stopping at the threshold. The door opened slightly. Emily stood there, holding Matthew tightly as he dozed. Her eyes were swollen and red, as if she had been crying for a long time. James stood up silently, afraid of breaking the fragile shell surrounding his children. He took Matthew in his arms, feeling how light the boy's body was, and how irregular his breathing was from exhaustion. The faint smell of watered-down milk clung to his collar. He gestured for Emily to sit, pulling a chair closer so they could be at eye level. But the girl still sat on the edge, her back rigid, her eyes darting to the door. "Dad." The small call was barely a fragment of breath, then it vanished. James nodded, as if to say there was no need to force more words. He patted Matthew's back with a steady rhythm, catching the faint gurgle of the boy's stomach. Emily pulled her sleeve down to cover her wrist, her fingertips brushing the frayed hem of her dress, her legs flinching sometimes when a distant sound stirred in the hallway. The air in the room was thick with pauses, as if every sentence wanted to emerge but then retreated. James handed her a cup of warm water. Emily received it with both hands. She took a tiny sip. Her eyes were still fixed on the outline of the doorframe, as if expecting someone to enter. He wanted to ask 1,000 questions but held back, fearing that even one misplaced word might make her retreat further. Instead, he chose a neutral phrase, light as placing a blanket over her shoulders. "Sit here where it's warm." The girl nodded, let out a brief sigh, and then looked down. When her sleeve slid back, a purple mark appeared for a moment, then vanished like a fish diving into dark water. James saw it but pretended not to. His chest tightened with partial understanding, and with the weight of not yet having enough proof to name the rest. Matthew fell asleep, his small hand clinging to James's collar, as if it were the last anchor he had. James stayed perfectly still, fearing that even the slightest movement might awaken the fragile fears trying to settle. "You're safe here." His voice was barely a whisper. Its warmth conveyed more than the words themselves. Emily nodded weakly. Her lips trembled as if she wanted to speak, but then she fell silent. Outside, the wind crept through the crack in the door in a thin line, making the hook on the keys chime. The girl flinched. Her hand curved back in a reflex born of long practice. James reached out, intending to place a light touch on her wrist to reassure her. Emily recoiled slightly. Her chair creaked with the softest sound. He froze instantly, his hand suspended in the air. Then he pulled it back as if pulling it from a flame. The silence thickened with another layer. Inside his chest, a question unleashed itself. When did the distance between father and daughter become so vast? My own child is afraid of even my hand. Before we continue, please take a moment to leave a comment about this story and rate it from 1 to 10. How are you feeling? If there's anything you'd like to share, I'm always here to listen. I hope you find a moment of peace and reflection as you follow this healing story and its journey of courage and justice. James remained still for a long time after Emily pulled her hand back. He took a deep breath, placed Matthew back in the bassinet, and pulled the blanket over him. Emily sat huddled in the chair, hugging her knees. James crouched down, speaking slowly. "Sleep here tonight. I'll be right beside you." He dimmed the light, but he could not sleep. Images of Sophia and her warm smile surfaced from the darkness. He found himself walking to his late wife's old room. A faint fragrance still lingered. James opened a small drawer where Sophia used to keep Emily's cards. A thin envelope slid from the edge, caught against the wood. On the front was the handwriting he knew so well. For James. His hand trembled as he opened it. The slanted cursive felt like Sophia's voice speaking to him. "If I am no longer here, please protect Emily and Matthew. Don't trust too quickly. Believe your daughter's eyes. When she is scared, she won't know how to lie." James sank to the floor. The paper trembled with his breath. The image of Emily, her dress dirty, her eyes wide with fear. A wave of sharp, stabbing pain, of fatherly love, squeezed his chest. He pressed the letter to his heart. "I'm sorry, Sophia. From now on, I will protect our children." The next morning, James woke early. Veronica appeared, smiling as usual. "Did you sleep well?" "I'm taking Emily to her music class." James gave a restrained smile. "I have things to do at home. You keep to your schedule." Throughout the day, he remained calm, but his eyes never left Veronica's movements. In the mid-afternoon, she received a call, her voice dropping. "All right, 10 minutes in the back garden." James moved silently, circling the stone path, and stopped behind a row of trees. A stranger entered through the side gate, a man in a dark coat. "Right on time, Carl," Veronica said. Carl looked around. "I need more proof you have the right. The marriage certificate is there, but the power of attorney signature for the family trust is still missing." "Harrison isn't stupid." Veronica gave a cold smile. "Don't worry. He's busy playing the perfect father. I'll get it another way." James stood frozen. He had heard enough. "She's not just abusing my children. She's conspiring for the inheritance." He walked back inside, his hand gripping Sophia's letter. He called his lawyer. "Richard, come to my house tonight. There's something in the portfolio we need to discuss." Near midnight, James heard a faint metallic click at the end of the hall. He stood up quickly. Someone had turned off the hall light. He flipped the switch. In front of the children's room, Emily was sitting hunched on the floor, hugging Matthew tightly. The baby was wrapped hastily in a thin blanket. The lock on the outside of the door clicked just as it released. "Who left you out here?" James asked, his voice thick with contained anger. She locked the room," Emily whispered. James gathered them both, carrying them to his own room. He laid Matthew in the middle of the bed and sat Emily by the edge. Her voice trembled. "Dad, are you going to leave us, like stepmommy said?" James froze. He could only pull the girl closer, holding her against him. He didn't know how to answer without it sounding too late. He only repeated the one thing he could be sure of. "I'm here." From the hallway, Veronica's voice came, soft as silk. "I think we need to talk, James." "The children are asleep," he said through the door. "We'll talk in the morning." The next night, his lawyer, Richard Monroe, arrived. Veronica played the perfect hostess. Dinner began. Veronica placed meat on Emily's plate, her hand pressing on the girl's shoulder, just hard enough to make her flinch. "Eat, honey," she said sweetly. Later, Veronica leaned close to Emily's ear, her voice a thin blade. "Remember, if you whisper one word, your little brother will pay the price." Emily froze, lowering her spoon. After dinner, when the children were gone, Richard leaned forward. From the moment I walked in, I saw a little girl flinch from pain. Did you call me here about money or about something else? James told him everything. The words on the staircase, the lock, the bruises, the meeting in the garden. Richard took out a notebook. My friend, I'm afraid your second wife is hiding much more than she appears, and I can help you find out the truth. Where do we begin? After Richard left, James confronted Veronica in the living room. I need to talk with you. Now. Explain the bruise on Emily's arm. Veronica dropped the glass she was holding. It shattered. The facade was gone. Accusing me? After I've been here all day with them? You want to know the truth? Her voice was dry, full of resentment. Fine. Do you really think I want to take care of Sophia's children? You never chose me, James. You only chose her shadow. Focus on the topic, James said, his voice cold. Answer the question. They're stubborn. She screamed. They need to learn obedience. I teach them like a mother teaches. A mother. James's voice was dangerously low. Sophia taught them by holding them, not by locking doors and threatening them. Sophia, always perfect. Veronica laughed, a harsh, broken sound. I hate her, and I hate those 2 children who wear her face. You married me out of pity. I married you because I thought my children needed a mother, James said, the words heavy as stone. I was wrong, and tonight I've corrected it. I'm meeting with the lawyer tomorrow about the trust and about custody, and about the abuse. You wouldn't dare, she sneered. The court will believe me. The devoted stepmother. Where were you? Hiding in your golden office. I can live with their words, James said. What I can't live with is the sound of my children crying. In the Cook County Domestic Relations Court, the air was thick and still. The judge, Elena Morales, was a woman in her 50s with sharp, observant eyes. Veronica's lawyer, Andres Peña, painted her as a devoted stepmother, overwhelmed by a grieving husband's absence. Richard Monroe was concise. Your Honor, we are requesting an emergency protection order for abuse and negligence. We call Mrs. Davis, the housekeeper testified. I saw the girl forced to stay on the porch. I found them sleeping in the locked storage room. The baby was given diluted milk. I heard Miss Veronica threaten to throw them out if the girl ever told her father, Peña countered. The memory of an elderly woman? I worked in that house for 10 years, Mrs. Davis said, her voice firm. I do not confuse her voice. Richard presented the time-stamped photos of the bruises. Peña dismissed them. Children fall. These photos prove nothing. Veronica dabbed her eye with a tissue. I did my best. He was gone for months. Richard presented Sophia's letter. Not as proof of behavior, Your Honor, but as context. Believe your daughter's eyes. The judge read it and admitted it into evidence. The courtroom was tense. The judge looked at James. The court requires more direct evidence. Can the child speak? James knelt by Emily. You don't have to say anything if you're scared. I'm right here. Emily looked at the judge, then at her father's open hand. She took a breath. I want to talk. She climbed onto the witness stand. The judge spoke gently. You only need to tell the truth. Emily looked at her hands, then lifted her head. She said if I told my dad she would throw me and my brother on the street, but I can't be quiet anymore. I don't want my brother to grow up scared. Her voice broke, but she did not cry. In the gallery, James covered his eyes. The room was silent. Judge Morales leaned back. She looked at Veronica, then at her lawyer. She looked at James, and then back at Emily. Thank you, child. Peña tried to recover. Your Honor, a child's words can be influenced. The judge held up a hand. Enough. Suddenly, Veronica's chair screeched back. She leaped to her feet, pointing at the stand, her voice exploding. Liar! You're just like your mother, always pretending to be so holy. The bailiff moved instantly. Order! The judge's gavel cracked 3 times. The defendant will be seated. Veronica laughed, a harsh, wild sound, but her outburst had sealed her fate. Judge Morales' voice cut through the room, based on the testimony, the photographs, the contextual letter, and the defendant's own threatening behavior toward a minor in this courtroom. This court issues an emergency order of protection. Defendant Veronica Heiss is suspended of all custody and visitation rights. Temporary custody is granted to the plaintiff, James Harrison. Furthermore, this case is referred to the District Attorney's Office to investigate child abuse and fraudulent conduct related to the family trust. The defendant is found in contempt of court and will be remanded into custody. James rushed forward, pulling Emily into his arms, burying his face in her hair. 2 years later, the sky over Lake Forest was clear. Emily, now 8, held her brother Matthew's hand as he toddled down a brick path. A small wooden sign hung from the fence. Mommy Sophia's garden. Emily knelt, showing her brother the green tomatoes. "Dad, look! Matthew and I are growing tomatoes for you." James sat in a wooden chair, a notebook in his lap. He watched them, seeing in Emily a girl who knew she was loved. Matthew stumbled forward, his face raised in a wide smile, James's lips curved. He whispered a line meant only for the one who was gone. "Sophia, I did it. I kept my promise." Emily ran over and rested her head on her father's shoulder. The scent of sun and earth clung to her hair. "Dad," she said, "we're really a family now, aren't we?" James held her close. "Yes, and we always will be." Matthew hugged their legs, trying to get into the embrace. James gathered both children in his arms and leaned back. The night fell, but the garden remained warm. Inside, the photograph of Sophia on the shelf seemed like a silent blessing of peace.